The Seferim Sh'likhim, the New Testament, talks about the promise of God. Luke 24:49 says, "And behold, I send the promise of my Father upon you." Acts 2:39 says, "For the promise is to you and to your children." Acts 13:23 says, "Of this man's seed has God, according to promise, raised to Yisrael a Savior, Yeshua." Ephesians 2:12 says, "And strangers from the covenants of promise." Hebrews 6:13 says, "For when God made promise," they're talking about a covenant, right? "For when God made promise with Abraham, because he could swear by no greater, he swore by himself." So here it's very clear that promise is covenant, right? Some verses make it sound like the Mashiach, the Messiah, is the promise. Other verses sound like it is the infilling of the ghost of God. Most make it sound like the law is the promise, while other verses are not clear at all. Hebrews 16:13 is clearly making the covenant the promise. Think about it. If you make a covenant, aren't you making a promise? I'm just saying. We can be sure of one thing: everyone wants the promise, maybe not the responsibility, but definitely the promise. Yeah, definitely the promise, definitely. Jews, Christians, and the Western world as a whole have come to see the Bible as dividing the world into two distinct people, the Jews and the Gentiles. Though from the time of the New Testament, it has been further split into Jews, Christians, and Gentiles. But think about this bombshell theory for a moment. What if the Bible was strictly written by Jews, to Jews, concerning matters of the Jewish religion? What if Christianity had nothing to do with it? What would that look like? Abraham, the father of the Jews, was a Chaldean, not a Jew. He was not a natural born Jew. He was born Chaldean and raised Chaldean. What made him a Jew? Well, he converted to Judaism. And from the moment Abraham, a, shall we say, Gentile, from the moment he converted to Judaism, the door has always been open to anyone who wants to live according to God's law to become Jewish. So, what are you saying, Rob? Well, I'm saying that the Bible gives us Jews, then Gentiles, and then the rest of the world. Christianity didn't exist during the time of Yeshua, that's Jesus, or his Talmudim, that's his disciples. Further, I'm also suggesting that the people referred to as Gentiles in the biblical text were Jews. In short, I'm saying that the Gentiles were not people from nations other than Israel. I'm saying that Gentiles were Jews living in nations other than Israel. The name of this message is The Conversion of the Gentiles. Please stand and cover yourselves for the reading of our scriptures, or scripture. Just for those of you who don't know, I can't stand. I'm tethered to many wires and that kind of thing. It is not a commandment of God. We are not commanded to stand. We're not commanded to cover our heads. But Yeshua did, the guy we called Jesus, well, not we, but the guy that Christians called Jesus, when anyone read the scriptures or when he read them to the people, his head was always covered with his talit, and it looked a lot like this. We know because they found them in digs in Israel from that time period, so we know that's what they look like. But he covered his head. His Talmudim, his disciples, they all covered their head, and their disciples did the same. So to honor Yeshua and to be as much like him as humanly possible, we just follow suit. Our verse today is Bereshit, or as you know it, Genesis 26:4. It says, "Vehir Beiti et zar aha kehochve hashamayim venatati zar aha et kol ha'arazot ha'el vehit barachu ve'zar aha kol goye ha'aretz. All right, you may be seated. Our first verse, of course, is Bereshit, or Genesis 26:4. And our first word is Vehir Beti. Literally, it's and multiply I. So what we would say in English is I will multiply. It is from Rava, or Rava. It is to be multiplied, to increase, to be many, to become many, to be numerous, to become numerous, to become great, to become greater, hence to grow up, to be great, also to be mighty. Do you hear Rav? And which is, of course, the root of Rabbi, Rabbi. Yeah, it's often that same word. They don't call rabbis rabbi because they're great people. They call them rabbi because they are great in learning. It's kind of how they. Some people say that it's the equivalent of a master's degree. I don't agree with that. I think it's the equivalent of a doctorate degree. But anyway, the next word is et. And in Hebrew, et has no meaning. It's just, I always just draw an arrow when I'm translating because it's just a pointer. It points to something specific. It is then our next word following that, what's specific here is zar-aha, which is literally seed your. So it's from zera, which is seed. Properly, it's of sowing. So it's like a seed. You cultivate, you cut up, plow up the ground. That's the word I'm looking for. You plow up the ground and then you put your seeds in the ground and then, things grow. You put the seed of corn, you probably won't get apple trees. You probably get corn, right? So that's what we're talking about. It's that kind of thing. Sowing, putting the seeds in the ground is called sowing. It's of seed time, the time of sowing. Winter is when you're supposedly supposed to plant. I've never planted in the winter. It's also a planting, it says, seed, that which is scattered, because you take the seed and you scatter. That's how I did my front yard. We got grass growing in our front yard. Woo! I'm so happy. Whether of plants, trees, of grain, of my grass in my front yard. Hence that which springs from seed, sown, harvest, field of grain. It's used of offspring, obviously, of progeny, of descendants, because your kids grow up like a weed. Oh, I'm just kidding. They use it of a race of people, race of men. So you guys follow that. Then that's followed by the word kehochbe. It's as they've added a keh sound, and in Hebrew that's the equivalent of our word as. So your word is kohav. You're probably more familiar with kokva, bar kokva, bar being son of the star. This is that word. This is where that comes from. It just means star. In Hebrew, never try to study out and get something deep from a noun. In Hebrew, nouns just name things. There's nothing profound about it. If somebody's got a book about all these profound names and the hidden secrets behind them, don't waste your money on it. And if you have the book, use it for kindling the next time you need to start a fire. Hebrew did not work that way. I don't know about modern Hebrew, but ancient Hebrew did not work that way. Noun is a noun. It just names something. There's nothing profound or hidden about any noun. So when they say stars, they're just talking about those things we see in the sky. That's followed by Hashamayim, the heavens, the skies. In Hashamayim, you can talk about the sky above with the fluffy clouds in it, but it's also used of the heavens, the expanse that's beyond what we can see here, out there where the Milky Way is and all that other stuff. And it's even of the expanse that's beyond that we probably will never see. Certainly no one in our lifetime. But it's the heavens. And again, this is a noun, so it's just of that stuff that's up in the air and beyond. Then we follow that with benatati, which is and give I, literally. So it's and I give. It's from the word Natan. It's where it sounds like Satan, right? No, it's Natan, which is like Nathan. They use, I don't know where the TH thing came from because they don't have the TH sound in Hebrew. You didn't even have the TH sound in Greek. But you see when they translate, there's always, if they don't say Theo, they say Theo. I don't know why they do that, because it's Theo. And it's the same way here. It's Natan, not Nathan. But anyway, that's give. It's to give. It's to cause to receive. It's not like that guy that took my wife and I out to dinner that night with, he had $20,000 in this little case he had. He said he was going to give it to us, but he didn't cause us to receive it. And this is the word, to cause to receive. If you give somebody something, they have to receive it into their hands. So it's of giving something from your hand to another. So they use it of giving when you win a victory. The spoils are given into the hand of the victor. If there are people, they became slaves back in ancient days, and they were part of the spoils. So the person was given into the power of someone else, and it was used that way in the Bible. And if you're saying God is great and he's wonderful and he's awesome, you are giving him, ascribing to him the greatness and the wonderful and all of that, right? So they use it that way as well. But it's to give, but you have to understand, to give in Hebrew, there's no paying it forward. Paying it forward is not a Bible concept. I know that they're teaching it in every church from one end of the world to the other. It is not from the Bible. It is secular. It is devilish. In the Bible, you cannot give expecting to receive, because that's called a loan. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with my voice today. You just cannot do that. You give expecting nothing in return. Otherwise, you've done nothing but give someone a loan. You've made a loan. You've not given anything. So it has to go with you've never given anyone anything if you expect something in return. If you give money to somebody, don't think for a minute God's going to give you something back, because you won't. If you expect to receive something, but it says, prove me. Remember, those are Gentiles teaching that. I never taught that. Hopefully the Jews are not teaching that, because you cannot give expecting anything in return. Don't do that. And when you pay your tithe, don't you dare expect God to give you something. Just like when I was a kid, I remember somebody saying to my mother, that they gave their kids an allowance, but their kids didn't do anything. They just got an allowance. And my mother was like, what? My kids don't do anything. They don't get anything. And we didn't get an allowance for doing the work. The work was the bare minimum. You lived there, you cleaned up, you made your bed, you did your part of the cleaning. You were not rewarded for something that was expected of you. And God's the same way. You're supposed to pay a tithe. You do not get rewarded for paying your tithe. It's what you give beyond that there can be a reward, but not if you expect one. You just give, and if God decides to reward you in heaven, that should be fine with you. Sometimes he rewards us on earth, and that's a bonus, I mean, as we see it, probably in heaven's way better. But, we see the bonuses here on earth. We see the giving back on earth as a big bonus. But hopefully you follow what I'm saying. Hopefully that doesn't sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. If you give expecting something, you will not get anything. But if you give with no expectations, then generally speaking, God will reward you for that. Well, actually, I should just say right out, God will reward people for that. Now, if you give to devilish causes, don't expect God. Even if you're not expecting anything in return, you might get some reward from the devil, but you won't get. I'm just teasing with you. Our next word is le-zar-aha. They've just put a lamed in front of the word for seed. We've already had this word. It's of the sowing. It's of descendants, offspring. Offspring is really the word you need to connect with this. When they talk about seed, they're talking about offspring almost always. Unless, of course, they're talking about planting season, then you know what they're talking about, the stuff you spread. But it's the same word, and they've just put the lamed in it, because when they put the lamed in front of a word, that's our equivalent of the word to the seed. So then we have the pointer et, and then it's kol, which is all, and then we have ha arazot, the lands, the earth, orbis. It's a word. It used to be a word. Now when you type orbis in your Word document, it comes up as a misspelled word. Orbis is not a misspelled word. It's just an old word. Orbis, the ball, right, that we live on, the big ball, the big blue ball. It's the opposite to heaven. It's earth, it's land, it's continent, opposite of the sea. It's a land, country, land, a piece of land, use of the land belonging to a town, the ground, the element of earth, earthly part. Often used, especially in the latter Hebrew, of the lands of the Gentiles, which, now that I know what I know about Gentiles, I'll probably change what Jusinius said. But anyway, well, what the English translation of Jusinius said, not so much what Jusinius said. Do you understand that in Hebrew, eretz, this isn't the word eretz, is it? Yes, it is. Eretz is used of dirt, a dirt clod, the ground you're standing on, a pile of dirt. It's used of your town is on the ground, your city is on the ground, your continent is ground, and then the whole ball. It's used of all of those things. Just depends on the context of the sentence. And then the next word is ha'el, which literally means these or those. It's probably all you need to know about that. It's just these or those. Then this is followed by the hit barahu, which is literally and make blessed they. So, and they will be made to be blessed. It is from barach, to bend the knees, to kneel down. The primary notion lies in breaking down. So it's taking away the burden, that which an animal carries. So you have to think of it in these terms, because they compare it to a camel, literally. That's the image behind it, is that the camel is told to drop to its knees, and generally it'll do that. Sometimes you have to help it get to its knees, but it goes to its knees, and you're preparing for a journey. So you put all of the stuff that you need to go on that journey on the back of this camel, and then you get it to stand up, and it follows you, or you ride it, or whatever. You know, if you've got a pack on it, you're probably on a different animal, and it's following, you know, the camel that you're riding. Because remember, when this was written, and what land it comes from, so they connect it to the camel. But when you arrive at your destination, now you give the command, and the camel drops to its knees, and this is of the offloading. It is the taking the burden off of the animal. So it's used in invoking God. I need relief from this burden. To ask for a blessing is to ask for relief from your burden. That's followed by, well, the zaracha. So now they take the word for offspring, the seed, the planting, the progeny, offspring. They're taking that word, and they're putting a bait in front of the word. So that bait means, in our language, we think of it as the word in. Sometimes we'll change that to with, but basically you should think of the bait added to the front of a word as in. We're getting a lot of grammar stuff today, aren't you? So it's in seed your, because they've added the ha at the end, so it's in your seed is the way we would say it. So in your offspring. Then it's called all. Then it says go ye. And you probably hear it, goim, goi. So goi is what we say Gentile or nation. And then goim is the masculine plural. And then they have goye here, which is plural, but it's used of like you're saying it to a big group, so it changes a bit. It's of a people, properly a confluence of men. The word is generally, the word is general and used of the nations at large. Specifically, it is used of the other nations beside Israel. Now you understand that this is coming from the Jusinius, and this is a more modern way of looking at it. It actually doesn't line up with a solid foundational understanding of the biblical text. It is sometimes used of nations other than Israel, but that does not mean that we're talking about non-Jewish nations. This is the thing that's missing here in our understanding. It's poetically used of herds and of animals and even of troops, of army troops. They call them Gentiles because they're going to a foreign land. It's followed by ha-eretz, and when they add the hey or the ha sound to the beginning of a word, that's the direct object. So we use the word the or this for the hey. Just usually it's the, because think of it as the direct object. If you know enough grammar to know what that is. If you don't, just think of it as the word the. And if it doesn't work, replace it with this and you'll be okay. It'll be one of the two. It's almost always the, just general rule of thumb. Bible. I don't know about modern. I'm talking Bible. Always keep that in mind with me. But we're back to the earth, the orbis, the big ball that we live on. All right, here's my amplified translation, and it is mind-boggling. Don't worry if you don't understand it. I have one that will follow that you will. But now we're at Bereshit, or Genesis 26:4. And I will make great, multiply, increase, make numerous, make many, make mighty, and grow your offspring, seed, progeny, descendants, race, and family as the stars of the heavens. And I will give, by the way, he's talking to the Jews. He's going to make the Jews as numerous as the stars of heaven. Keep that in mind. And I will give, cause to receive, place in your hands, deliver into your power, set, put, place, make a covenant, impose a yoke, impute, devote myself to your offspring, seed, progeny, descendants, race, and family, all the earth, lands, continents, countries, towns, villages, and cities, and bend their knees, take away their burdens, and bless these, your offspring, seed, progeny, descendants, race, and family, in all people, nations, and herds of the earth, land, continent, country, town, village, and city. Right? It doesn't make any sense. So here's a regular translation that will. Again, we're at Bereshit. That's Genesis 26:4. And I will multiply your offspring as the stars of the heavens. So now again, he's talking to Abraham. He's talking to the father of the Jews. So he's saying that he's going to multiply the Jews. There's going to be so many of them, it'll be like the stars of heaven. No, that does not mean that there will be the same number of Jews as there are stars in the heavens. That's not what it means. It just means, yeah, try to count the stars. Good luck with that. Try to count the number of Jews. Good luck with that. It's hyperbole. But it means that there's going to be a lot of Jews following the covenant of God. Jews. No one else. Jews. You got to keep that in mind. There were no Christians when God's talking to Abraham. This is a long time before Christianity. So you got to keep this in mind. This is Jews, Jews, Jews. And I will multiply your offspring as the stars of the heavens, and I will give your offspring all the earth. I will give your offspring all the earth. All the earth, the totality. The orb, the big blue ball, at some point is going to belong, every inch of land, every bit of it is going to belong to the Jews, he said. And bless your offspring in all the nations of the earth. Listen to this last part. And bless your offspring, the Jews, in all the nations of the earth. English translations tend to say that the Gentiles will be blessed. The Gentiles will be blessed because of the Jews. Here's the King James Version, so you can see what I'm talking about. They call it Genesis 26:4. Again, this is King James. And I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heaven. Sounds the same? Yes. And will give unto thy seed all these countries, Eretz, all the earth. And in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. But that's not what the Hebrew text said. It is not. And why is this important? Well, because this verse is the promise spoken about in the Seferim Sh'likhim, in the New Testament letters. But did you catch it? The promise wasn't that the Gentiles would eventually be blessed by God. The promise was that God would give the entire earth to the Yehudim, to the Jews, and that he would bless the offspring of Abraham, the Jews, no matter where they are in this world. Let me read that again. Bereshit, Genesis 26:4. And I will multiply your offspring as the stars of the heavens, and I will give your offspring all the earth, and bless your offspring in all the nations of the earth. While our heads are still spinning, let me point out something from the Seferim Sh'likhim. It comes from Acts chapter 13, verse 46. This is my translation of the Greek. Becoming very bold, Shaul and Barnabas said, it was necessary to speak the word of God to you first. They're speaking to Jews. But you rejected it and judged yourselves unworthy of everlasting life. Behold, we turn to the Goim. So he's talking to Jews, saying, we went to you first, you blew it, you're going to hell, now we're going to the Gentiles. You see where Christianity got their start now? Sounds reasonable. After reading this verse, we are sure that Shaul is washing his hands of the Jewish people and moving on to the non-Jews, right? I think I'm right. But in verse 51, Shaul goes to Iconium. And continuing on with the story in chapter 14, verse 1, it says, and it came to pass in Iconium that they went together to the Edah. Synagogein is the word in Greek, synagogue. They went to the synagogue of the Yehudim, of the Jews. They went to the synagogue of, we're going to leave you Jews and go to the Gentiles. And what did they do? They went directly to another place outside of Jerusalem, outside of Israel proper, to a Jewish synagogue. Are you starting to catch something here? Verse 14:23 says, and when they had appointed Zikne, that's elders, to the Adat, that's the congregations, the synagogues. And when they appointed elders to the synagogues, then they journeyed to Lystra, Iconium, Antioch, Pisidia, Pamphylia, Perga, and Atalia. That sounds like our granddaughter's name. And then verse 27 says, of all these travels, it sums them all up in verse 27. It says, and when they arrived, they gathered the Edah. They gathered the congregation. They gathered the synagogue, proclaiming the great things God did through them. The synagogue. Verse 14:27 says, and when they arrived, did I just do that one? No. And when they arrived, they gathered the congregation. Yeah, it's different. Same thing, right? Head still spinning at this point. How about this? Acts 15:3 says, "So then indeed, being escorted to the Adah, to the congregation, to the synagogue, they passed through Tamar and Shomron," still not in Israel proper, are they? "Declaring the conversion of the Goyim." They've never been anywhere but the Jewish synagogues. And they're declaring the conversion of the Goyim, causing great joy to all the Torah observant ones, to all the brothers. Conversion of the Gentiles? How is this possible? How did that happen in the Jewish synagogues that won't let Gentiles in? Also, given that Catholicism, now called Christianity, did not begin until the mid-300s CE, it should be noted here that these people being called Goyim were converting to Torah observance, to Torah observant Judaism. But Rob, Yoel, or Joel, as some know him, says that God's Spirit will be poured out on all flesh. You know what? The Tanakh, the Bible, the Jewish Bible, was written by Jews, to Jews, for Jews. It is absolutely self-serving, self-gratifying, and self-exalting to put yourself in there with the Jews if you're not a Jew, don't you think? When we make the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, something that it is not, we are not only committing blasphemy, we are also taking God's name in vain. Did I mention that in verse 4 it says, "And when they arrived in Jerusalem," now they're going back to the Jewish town, right? They're back in Jerusalem, as most people know it. "They were received of the Edah," of the synagogue, of the synagogue. At this point, they took some time to hash out the requirements for conversion to Judaism, and then verse 41, it says, "And they went through Zur," sounds like they're not in Israel proper anymore, "and Cilicia," sounds like they're a long way from Israel proper, "strengthening the Adat," the congregations, the synagogues. Then they went to Derbe and Lystra, and verse 5 says, "Therefore the Adat," the congregations, the synagogues, were strengthened by Torah observance, by faithfulness, and increased in number daily. The synagogues. Well, by now, you get the picture. Shaul went to the Israelis, who considered themselves, the Israelites, who considered themselves Jews first. And when those Israelis, those Israelites, rejected him, he went to the Israelis, the Israelites who were not considered to be Jews. In short, Shaul never took his message to the non-Hebrew world. Translators did that long after his death. Consider Galatians 3:14 through 17. "That to the Goyim the blessings of Abraham came in Mashiach Yeshua." There weren't any blessings for the Goyim, were there? It was the Yehudim, the Jews, being blessed no matter where they were, no matter what nation they were in, right? So we should know he's talking about the Jews here. "That we might receive the promise," remember that, the covenant, "of the word," which they call spirit, through Torah observance, through faithfulness. The promise was for the reconciliation of God's covenant with the Yehudim, if you think about it, which would ultimately reconcile every human willing to be grafted into that same covenant. In other words, every human being willing to convert to Judaism. The piece of information that seems to be lost in a complete understanding of the Seferim Sh'likhim of the New Testament is that the Yehudim, the Jews, were divorced from God. That made them Gentiles as we know it, as we think of it. They were no longer Jews. Without a covenant with God, you're not a Jew. That's what you have to be a Jew. Think about Abraham. Was he a Jew when he didn't have a covenant with God? No. He became a Jew when he entered into covenant with God. Now, when the Yehudim, the Jews, broke their covenant with God, they were no longer Jews. They were just another Gentile nation as we think of it. So they were divorced from God, which made them Gentiles as we think of it. Thus, by the 1st century CE, by the time we have Yeshua and his Talmudim, Jesus and his disciples, non-observant Jews were called Gentiles by some. Others were called Gentiles because they didn't speak the Hebrew language, and some were called Gentiles simply because they were not born in Israel. I had that happen to me personally. I studied under Shlomo in Jerusalem, Israel. That's where he was born and raised. Professor at the Hebrew University. And he called me Caleb. Called me a dog the whole time I was his student. Took me a year to get up enough guts to ask him why. And he finally said, "You weren't born in Israel, were you?" And I said, "No." He said, "That makes you a dog." You see it? It was going on in the 1st century. Verse 15, Torah observant ones, brothers, I speak according to men. Nevertheless, if men confirm a covenant, remember the promise, if they confirm the promise, they neither reject nor add to it. They neither reject nor add to it. Yeah, Rob, but no, they neither reject nor add to it. Yeah, but no, they neither reject nor, yeah, but no, they neither reject nor add to it. There is no yeah, but. Don't reject any part of the covenant. Don't reject any part of the promise, because the covenant is the promise. God made this covenant, this promise with Abraham, and don't add anything to it. Additionally, if we cannot add to or take away from it, which we should know that we can't, then we surely shouldn't attempt to replace it. If the Seferim Sh'likhim, if the New Testament takes the place of the Tanakh, the Old Testament, then the covenant God made with Abraham was rejected. If the new takes place of the old has been rejected. But if we confirm a covenant, we don't reject it, do we? If the New Testament takes precedence over the Old Testament, I'm talking in Christian terms here. If the New Testament just, okay, well, it doesn't replace it, it just takes precedence over it. Well, if that's the case, then the New Testament was added to it. They neither reject it nor do they add to it. So there's a problem with the doctrine, isn't there? Verse 16, now to Abraham spoke these promises, this covenant. You can say it either way. He spoke these promises or he spoke this covenant. Because there's a lot of promises in the law. I'm just saying. So it goes on. And to his seed, to his offspring, his offspring. He did not say and offsprings. He did not say and seeds, as upon many, but as upon one. And to your offspring, your seed, which of course is Mashiach. Because his point at the time isn't really my point. His point was Mashiach came through the offspring of Abraham. And we all should know that, right? There's genealogy on both from his mother's side and from his father's side. He came from the seed of Abraham. And so that, of course, was the point of this particular verse. But it is completely aligned with what I'm saying here. There's only one progeny. There's only one offspring. Just one, and it's Jews. It's the Jewish nation. They are the only offspring of Abraham. There are no others. There's 12 tribes, which are called 12 nations. But that's it. It all comes from the same one person, so it's one nation. It is very important to understand that Shaul is making it clear that the promise does not go to any seed or nation. It goes to the seed of Abraham. There is no way for any human from any nation, under any circumstances, to receive the promise, the covenant of the Tanakh, unless that human is the offspring of Abraham, which can only happen if, one, that human is an actual descendant of Abraham, or two, if that human has been grafted into the offspring of Abraham, which, what does that mean? That means unless that human has converted to Judaism. There are two ways in. You either are born into it or you're grafted into. And when they talk about grafting in the Bible, they're talking about conversion. Verse 17, and this I say, listen to me carefully, and this I say, the covenant established by God, comma, the Torah. The covenant, 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 the Torah. The covenant, the Torah. The covenant, the Torah. So verse 17 says, and this I say, the covenant established by God, the Torah, which was given 430 years later, cannot disannul or abolish the promise. Probably because it is the promise. I'm just saying. Shaul just said that the Torah is the covenant. Don't tell me you have a covenant with God if you're rejecting God's law. Because the covenant is the Torah, and it says it right there in the New Testament letters. The Torah is the covenant. The covenant is the Torah. The Torah is the covenant. Not only that, he just told us that the covenant in no way abolishes God's promise. And as I said a while ago, it's probably because the covenant is the promise. The promise is the covenant. It is very important to understand that Shaul is making it clear that the promise does not go to any offspring. It doesn't go to some other nation. It goes to the offspring of Abraham. There is no way for any, as we think of it, Gentile, any non-Jew from some other nation under any circumstances to receive the promise of the Spirit unless that non-Jew becomes the offspring of Abraham, which could only happen if that non-Jew was either born, well, it can't happen if you can't be born into it if you're non-Jew. The only way it can happen, sorry, I wrote something wrong there, but so it can't happen that way. The only way a non-Jew can become a Jew is conversion. I think I've said it at least 3 times. They tell me you got to say it 3 times for it to sink in. So I've said it 3 times on purpose. Romans 9:30 says, what then shall we say? That the Goyim who did not follow after Torah observance have obtained Torah observance, even observance that is of faithfulness, but Israel who followed after, they call it righteousness, that's Torah observance, who follow after Torah observance or righteousness of the Torah, has not attained righteousness of the Torah. It's very confusing 2 verses, but are we saying, he says, are we saying that the Gentiles, the non-Jews, or I don't want to say non-Jews because he's not talking about non-Jews, that the ones they call Gentiles have obtained righteousness without the Torah, while the Jews who follow the Torah have not attained righteousness? Is that what we're saying? So he's asking this question, are you really saying that without the Torah you've somehow become Torah observant, as opposed to those who are Torah observant aren't Torah observant because they have the law? I mean, come on, this is crazy. The answer is no. Shaul is telling us that the Yehudim, the Jews who live outside of Jerusalem, who are called Goim or Gentiles at this time by the Jews from Jerusalem, obtained righteousness. That he's saying they've obtained righteousness in the same way that the Jews in Jerusalem did. They followed after God's will. In other words, the ones who are outside of Jerusalem have received righteousness because they've done the same thing that the ones who are in Jerusalem did. They're all Torah observant. That's what makes them righteous. Galatians 4. Tell me, you who desire to be under the Torah, do you not hear the Torah? Now some try very hard to make this verse out to mean that desiring to be under the Torah is bad, it's legalism, it's bondage. But Shaul is talking to foreign Yehudim. Maybe that's the way we should say it. Foreign Jews who have converted to Torah observance. Shaul's question is now, if you desire to be under the Torah, don't you think you should obey it. Acts 17:26. And made from one man every nation of men to dwell upon the face of the earth, commanding appointed times and the limits of their habitation. Made from one man, all nations of men to dwell, is a Hebrew idiom that means God has only made one covenant and one law to rule over everyone. When they start talking about one man, our immediate assumption is, oh, there must have been several, or at least two. And of course, things get translated that way because of that assumption. This means that all nations of the earth have to convert to Judaism. That's what it's really talking about. And live according to the laws contained within the Yehudi or Jewish covenant in order to be saved. Christianity does not have Jewish roots. Let me say that again. Christianity does not now, nor has it ever had Jewish roots. Christianity was developed by Jewish and non-Jewish, mostly Jewish though, philosophers, who used Platonic thought to translate first the Tanakh, what we call the Old Testament in the Western world, and later the Seferim Sh'likhim, what they call the New Testament letters. The Jewishness of the Seferim Sh'likhim, of the New Testament letters, still comes through, even though they have been horribly tampered with. What I'm trying to say, what an amazing document the original Hebrew letters must have been. That's poor English. What amazing documents the original Hebrew letters must have been to still be hidden under 2,000 years of false doctrine and revisionist history. To still be able to see it, to still be able to find it. What an amazing document the first one must have been. There is only one people, one nation, one God, one religion. I invite you to convert to Torah observance, no matter who you are, Jew or non-Jew. If you are a Jew living by the oral law, please let go of this man-made destructive path and follow the path of Torah observance, which was given by God himself. Not all oral law is bad or evil. In fact, some of it is very beneficial. What I mean by this is that when we get to the oral tradition and it begins to violate God's law, it tells you not to eat lamb, for instance, when God's law clearly commands it. Don't accept the excuses that they give. Oh, well, there's not a temple. You know what? There wasn't a temple when God gave the law, and God knew the temple would be destroyed when he gave the law, and he made no provision for us to not obey him when there wasn't one. Same goes for the lack thereof of the priest to look at your lamb. You were given a law. It says to eat lamb on Pesach. Do it. That's what I'm talking about. When we let men lead us away from Torah observance, we let men lead us away from the will of God. If you are a non-Jew, we invite you to experience the freedom of true servitude to God. It is true freedom. We invite you to experience the freedom of Torah observance. You will never be as free as you are, knowing where you stand with God. We invite you to convert to the only religion God has ever given. It's Judaism. We're not saying you have to give up on Yeshua. You will have to give up on Jesus. But Yeshua, the man who really did die on the cross, that really is a manifestation of God in the flesh. That really was the Mashiach in human form. He really did die to reconcile our covenant, the Jewish covenant that God made with Abraham. And when that happened, everyone, Jew or non-Jew, was supposed to go to live in according to the Torah. And if we'll all do that, then we'll all be Jews, and the whole earth will belong to the Jews, just as God promised. Shalom, ben shalom.